Thank you for joining the live stream. It will begin shortly. Are you interested in local history? Well, Backstage in the Gage is back. Join us at the Dean Heritage Centre today, backstage in the museum's Gage Library, to hear Poetry of Place spanning 200 years, showcasing artefacts and verse from the new Forest of Dean Writers Collection. The Forest of Dean Writers Collection is a collaborative project involving the University of Gloucestershire, the Dean Heritage Centre and local volunteers and schools to establish a unique literary collection. The Dean Heritage Centre is located in Sudeley in the Forest of Dean. As an accredited museum, we aim to preserve the Forest of Dean's heritage with stories and artefacts. Today we are celebrating National Poetry Day with the Forest of Dean Writers Collection as we showcase newly discovered work by two Cinderford poets who lived nearly 100 years apart. Thanks to national lottery players, the literary papers of past Forest of Dean writers will be conserved and made available to researchers, schools and the public. The new project will bring together a unique collection of material spanning more than 200 years, some written in local dialect that reflects the landscape, people and places of the Forest of Dean. Join us backstage at the Gage to hear about the life, times, places and works of Catherine Drew and Harry Beddington.
Hello and welcome to Backstage in the Gage, live from the Dean Heritage Centre right in the heart of the Forest of Dean. Welcome to our live audience who are here with us in the Gage Library, and welcome to you watching online. So today is National Poetry Day, UK National Poetry Day, and today's Backstage in the Gage is all about poetry and particularly two Forest of Dean poets. I'm Dr. Jason Griffiths from the University of Gloucestershire, and I'm also the project manager of the Forest of Dean Writers Collection. And I'm joined by two guests, helpers, important people today. On my right is
Nicola Wynne. I'm the collection officer here at Dean Heritage Centre.
Nicola's a key part of the operation here at the museum and a really key part of the project, the Forest of Dean Writers Collection project. On this side we've got...
I'm Maggie Clutterbuck. I'm a writer and a poet.
So Maggie is going to be helping us today with some poetry readings and using her expertise as a writer to reflect on, comment on some of the poets we're going to be talking about today and their work. Also over there, out of shot, we've got Abby. Abby is the press and marketing powerhouse of the Dean Heritage Centre. Abby's role today is she's going to be clicking next on the slides, showing our images and playing our audio out. Abby is also going to be fielding your questions. So we may have some questions from our live audience here today. I hope so by the end. But if you're watching online, just put your questions in the comments section, okay, on the YouTube, and Abby will be watching those and letting us know the questions at the end. One other thing, please do, if you're watching online, share the link with friends and family. It'd be great to have people from all over the world watching today. Okay, so Backstage in the Gage. Nicola, what is Backstage in the Gage?
We've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it's a 10-minute to half an hour talk given by myself, collections officer, or our team of very knowledgeable volunteers we've got here. And what we do is we get an object or two out of the stores, because most museums have got so many objects that they don't put on display. So it's a really good opportunity for our visitors to have a very close look at objects and find out more about all the wonderful objects we've got here at Dean Heritage Centre.
Brilliant. Okay, and today, as I've said, Forest of Dean Writers Collection, we've got some artefacts. We're going to be bringing some more out. They're absolutely key to what we're talking about today, our two poets. So, Forest of Dean Writers Collection, just a little bit of background. For a number of years, I've been involved with a colleague of mine, Dr. Roger Deeks, in a project called Reading the Forest, where we have been researching and promoting the rich literary heritage of the Forest of Dean. Now, during our work for that project, we came across lots of collections of writers' papers, their notes, unpublished work, which belonged to the families of the writers. And during our conversations with those through the life of the project, these, I guess you would call them literary estates, were saying we would love these papers to go to a really good home and them to be used to help keep the memory of these Forest of Dean writers alive. So the Forest of Dean Writers Collection project was born, and we're very grateful to the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which has made it possible. And over the last 12 months or so, we've been bringing this amazing material into the Dean Heritage Centre, specifically into the Gage Library here, where an amazing team of volunteers have been cataloguing it. And we've also been using it to do outreach exhibitions. And really important, we've been working with a couple of partner schools as well to develop pilot work around using the material to encourage new young writers as well. So that's the Forest of Dean Writers Collection. Today is UK National Poetry Day, and we're focusing on two specific poets, and they are both from the town of Cinderford. So here we are in Sudeley, not very far from Cinderford. We are in a beautiful woodland setting with the mill pond out there. Just a short distance away, we've got a lovely series of ponds, and just a few miles away is the town of Cinderford. And we're going to be talking about that, and Nicola in particular is going to be telling us about a little bit of the history of Cinderford to give us a sense of context. But the two poets and writers we are talking about today were born pretty much 100 years apart. But what they do have in common is they both pretty much stayed their whole lives in Cinderford. And they became very popular locally in their lifetime. We've got other poets connected to Cinderford, like Leonard Clark, for example, who left the area, always stayed connected to it, wrote about it a lot, and became a significant literary figure. And I think it's fair to say that beyond the Forest of Dean, the two poets we're talking about today are not yet significant literary figures. So our poets are Catherine Drew, who was born at the end of the 18th century, and Harry Beddington, who was born in the first year of the 20th century, both two Cinderford poets. So, I believe we've got a slide. This should be a slide showing an image of the Catherine Drew mural. I think it's slide number 3, Abby. Yeah, okay. So our first poet that we're talking about is Catherine Drew. I say Catherine Drew. She was born as Catherine Smith in 1784, and she was born at a place called Guns Mill, which is near Mitchell-Dean, not too far from Cinderford. And Catherine was born into a large family. Her father had remarried after his first wife died. His new wife already had 8 children. The new marriage went on to have 2 children, the second of which was Catherine, who became known as Kitty as well, Kitty Smith. Not a well-off family. Her father worked in Guns Mill, which was a paper mill at the time. They were, I would not say they were in absolute poverty, but they were certainly the poorer end of the social scale. So that's where Catherine grew up. She tells us in her one and only book that was published that she only had a few days in school. She was actually taught to read and write by her father, and from a very young age she started writing poetry. Now, she grew up and started work as a farm labourer, and then I believe she spent a short time, if I remember correctly, as a domestic servant. But she married her husband James Drew, who's what's described as a yeoman farmer, and they married in 1806. And at some point after they were married, they moved to this place called Little Dean Woodside. So, Little Dean Woodside, where is that? Well, actually today we would describe Little Dean Woodside as Cinderford, the town of Cinderford. In those days, Cinderford really wasn't what it is today. It wasn't a big sort of a sprawl of a town. It was a small series of settlements. And before we get into the detail of Catherine Drew, and before, much more importantly, we hear Maggie read some of her poems, Nicola, beginning early years of the 19th century, when Catherine was a young woman, and up into the mid-century, tell us about Cinderford. What was it like and what was going on there?
Well, when Catherine Drew was born in 1784, and the end years of the 1700s and through to the early 1800s, there wasn't much in Cinderford. For hundreds of years, the Forest of Dean had been quite lowly populated, with few free miners and woodsmen. But the town really grew through the 1800s. In her poem, Forest of Dean, Times Past Contrasted with the Present, she looks back to her childhood, and she writes about here and there a cot, describing Forest of Dean, and she describes Cinderford as a wild, unpeopled spot. So through the 1800s, we've got the growth of the Industrial Revolution, we've got improvements in technology, we've got steam-powered pumps, we've got blast furnaces, we've got the growth of collieries in Cinderford and around the forest as well. That changed from free mines to the deeper shaft, the larger pits in the Forest of Dean. We've also got the establishment of ironworks in Cinderford and other industries as well. So Cinderford became an important centre for mining in the Forest of Dean. It had some of the most productive mines in the Forest of Dean for coal, including Bilson, Crump Meadow, Lightmoor, Trafalgar, Fox's Bridge and Bilson. So the industries in the Forest of Dean, based on coal and iron, were really important, and they employed thousands of men, which drew people into the Forest of Dean and Cinderford. So Cinderford grew into quite a big town, and it had shops, beer houses. There was the establishment of St John's Church. We had two chapels as well, Wesley Chapel and the Baptist Chapel. You had the growth of cultural life as well, sports teams, bands, choirs, eventually a town hall established. Because of the rapid growth of Cinderford, there were also some problems. So there was quite poor housing initially, and there was some poverty. There were outbreaks of cholera and typhoid at one point. There were fluctuations in the price of coal, and that led to colliers' pay and the number of days they worked being cut. So that did lead to some poverty. Catherine Drew also mentions in this same poem, Forest of Dean, Times Past, about the change from free miners, who she describes as being free with no tyrants to oppress them then. And though they were poor, they didn't know distress. And she talks about the change into the deep shaft mines and how foreigners crowed over the free miners. And what she's writing about here is that change from free miners who operated in small pits and owned the pits to wealthy industrialists coming in from outside of the forest and owning large pits and employing thousands of men as wage labourers. Is that a pretty sort of broad brushstrokes there? Is that okay, Jason?
That's fantastic, and hopefully you've got a bit of an understanding of the context and the times in which Catherine was living, that increased industrialisation of the forest. Particularly for our online audience, if you know anything about the Forest of Dean, you'll know obviously there are trees, and it's a wonderful landscape to enjoy the forest environment. But it's got a long industrial history because of its mineral wealth. It goes back actually thousands of years, but absolutely, as you say, beginning of the 19th century, it really starts to take off. Abby, for our online audience, could you go back a couple of slides to the one of Catherine, or of the mural specifically? So just to reference that, the reason we've got a random silhouette with a question mark on is we don't know what Catherine looked like there. She was not a wealthy person. No one was painting portraits of poor Kitty Drew, as she describes herself. So we don't know what she looked like. But I'm very pleased to say that a real enthusiast for Catherine Drew happens to be in our audience today, Stan Boscher, was so excited about Catherine Drew and her work that he commissioned local artist Tom Cousins to actually paint a mural imagining what Catherine would look like. And I think it's a great sort of approximation of what she may have looked like in the forest, sitting down in her notebook, writing one of her poems. So that's Catherine Drew. That's who she is. That's what we know about her and about her kind of life and time. So let's think about her poetry. How do we know about her? We don't know what she looked like, but what we do know, could you be glamorous assistant, Nicola, and hold up this amazing artefact? Now, this is the only ever publication in book form of Catherine's poems, and it comes from 1841. So I've been talking about she wasn't wealthy. She wasn't well known beyond the forest. How come she had a book or a booklet of poems published? Well, she did it through subscription. She had lots of friends, and we think she knew some relatively influential people locally. And they encouraged her, come on, let's get a book of your poems. So she basically got somewhere near 200 subscribers to pay up front, is what we think she did. So they paid up front, some of them for multiple copies. That basically funded the production of her book at the local printers. So here we have 1841. We don't know how many copies were printed. We imagine probably a couple of hundred. They are incredibly difficult to find. Even local mad enthusiast book collectors and even a local incredible book dealer who's got some incredibly rare material, I think he said he's never actually seen one. So this is a wonderful artifact to have, the actual copy. But as it's so rare, how do we know about these poems? Well, because it was republished in 1904. And it says in the introduction, again, through popular demand, because so many people remembered her and talked about her, but they couldn't get a hold of the book. So it was an edition was produced in 1904. And then the local book dealer I just mentioned, he produced a facsimile edition in 2002. So it's around, it's in circulation. That's how we know about her as a poet. There are 8 poems in there, including the one that Nicola described, a very long, it's been described as a documentary poem, describing the changes that Catherine saw in the forest. There's some known people that we know about, that she talks about, lots of known places. She talks about the incredible changes in the forest. She talks about the railways. In Catherine's day, what she's describing there are horse-drawn railways or tram roads, which had a big impact on the mining in the Forest of Dean, because they were able to much more quickly and easily transport coal out of the forest. So an amazing collection of poems. We'll talk in a moment how we came across this particular book. Okay, so that's the 1841 collection, 8 poems. We knew that Catherine had written poems and they were known about before this book. So we know from a historian, a Victorian historian of the forest, the Reverend Nichols, that she had one of the poems in that book had been published or written certainly in 1835, and we think it may have been in one of the local newspapers it was printed. We've not tracked it down yet. So we knew about those poems, but we have since got our hands on some newly rediscovered poems, which we're all very excited about. These are poems that were not known of, certainly in modern times, had been completely forgotten. And amazingly, they are written in Catherine's own hand. And here we have one of those poems. So there we are, that's Catherine's own writing, which again, for this person we knew so little about, we didn't know what she looked like, we just knew of this mysterious person called Catherine or Kitty Drew. Here we have now, after a few years of research and wonderful discoveries, we have this handwritten poem by her. So, I'm sure you can't, and there's another one on the reverse. That's a Christmas piece. Safe to say it's not very Christmassy. It certainly doesn't mention Santa Claus. Catherine was a deeply religious person, and it's very much reflecting on the nativity and linking it to the crucifixion. So we're not gonna study that one today. We're going to have another one, which it's National Poetry Day. Let's hear a poem. Maggie, over to you. This one is untitled, but the first line is, I love the greenwood in the beautiful spring. So over to you, Maggie.
Thank you. I love the greenwood in the beautiful spring, when the cuckoo is come and the small birds does sing, and Flora is decked in her mantle of green, and the pretty blue violets enliven the scene. The noble tall oak that the ivy clings round shows us God made the forest, but man made the town. The blackbird sings sweet in the top of the tree. The thrush too, she sings, what sweet melody. The owl sits all day in the old hollow tree. When the sun shines, in fact, poor Tom cannot see. When all the choristers besides are at rest, Tom will then cry pee-wit, the night he loves best. See, here is a bird's nest, how neatly 'tis made. Not the brightest mechanic, though still in his trade, could not make it so well, let him try how he will. No tools had this bird than his own little bill. The next water lily grows near the mill, and the flower called heart's ease you may pluck if you will. But mind, 'tis with honour this flower will abide, 'twill wither and die with ambition and pride. Now I'll sit me down neath the shade of this yew, whilst the daisy is drinking the bright morning dew. Here free I can think, and I love to be free. To the noise of a town I'm not used, you see. There's vice in all forms, with ambition and pride, though decked in jewel and in coaches does ride. I'd much rather sip at the pure limpid spring, enjoy pure nature and hear the birds sing. For the goodness of God one and all does sustain, his power is seen in the sunshine and rain. Then let us adore him, fear him, and love the author of all things as well as the grove. The town and the cockneys must do as they can. 'Tis the forest produces the worthiest man.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maggie, for reading that. Crikey, there's so much packed into that poem, isn't there?
There is, yeah. It's very much of its time, but it's funny how I think she sort of, her friends are obviously the forest, and the enemy is the town. And even though, like Nick was saying, there was very little in the way of town, so she probably wouldn't have known big towns, especially as we know them now. But even then, it was an enemy. I understand that.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's of the period. It kind of taps into the kind of romantic poetry, romanticising nature and the dark satanic mills of Cinderford, the industry. Yeah, and there's that again. There's that her Christian faith that comes through there as well, isn't it?
Yes,
relating it to the Creator, God the Creator, and absolutely.
But amazing that she had so little education and yet she can write like that.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
And what's so lovely about these newly discovered poems is we knew about her, as I say, those kind of documentary poems, and some of them are kind of social commentary as well. And she does refer to nature and talk about her love of nature, but this really is absolutely focusing on the landscape and nature and how important it was to her, which is absolutely lovely, isn't it? Yeah. So, how did we come across this poem? Well, I mentioned the work of Reed in the Forest, and during our time working on that project, we were contacted by someone who has proven to be a great friend of Reed in the Forest, a gentleman in America called Michael Wright. Michael is a descendant of Catherine Drew because in the 19th century, Catherine Drew's, I think it was first her grandson, if I remember correctly, emigrated to America. After Catherine died, her son then followed him and emigrated to America. Now, there's an item that her son took with her, which we're going to introduce you to in a moment, which I'm very excited about. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, the family were then, or an element of the family were in America. And in the 1920s, the local poet who I mentioned, Leonard Clark, did a piece on Catherine Drew in the local newspaper. Now, that somehow got out to the descendants in America, and I believe they then started up a correspondence, and a gentleman called William Gardner, if I'm remembering correctly, was a friend of Catherine's son-in-law in Cinderford, and I think they shared a rented house together for a short period. William knew Catherine, and he had in his possession these handwritten poems. So in the 20s, he sent them out to the descendants in America. So that's how they ended up in America. They get passed down to Michael Wright, who gets in touch and incredibly kindly says, I think these should be back in the forest, and donates them to the new Forest of Dean Writers collection. So that's how we now have them here. So if you're watching, thank you, Michael, again. But what else did he send over? Well, this is something myself and my colleague Roger got very, very excited about. You may or may not be as excited, but I wonder if, Nicola, you could show this very delicate artefact. Remember, we have nothing tangible connecting us to Catherine apart from these poems and this hat, which we understand to have been her bed cap or nightcap that she wore to bed. And we know it was hers. We have very good provenance. Obviously, it came from the descendants, but it had a little note with it saying this belonged to Catherine Drew. And passed down through the family is the story that her son took it as a keepsake of his mother after she died and took it out to America. And that's where it's been until very, very recently, when it was sent over to the Dean Heritage Centre here in the Forest of Dean. Nicola, you're holding it with gloves and treating it with great reverence. It is old. It dates back to, well, Catherine died in 1867, so it dates back at least to 1867. She probably had it for many years. Tell us a little bit about what you've been able to find out about it, and also about how we take care of something like this, because it's not a poem, it's not a book. What do we do with it?
Well, we're looking after it very carefully. We handle it with gloves and we pad it with the archival tissue paper, and it's wrapped up in tissue paper for storage. One of our volunteers here, and ex-trustee, she's very knowledgeable about costume and she does talks as well. So we asked her, why would women wear a nightcap to bed? And she explained that it was partly to keep their hair tidy and in place, but also because women back then didn't wash their hair so much. So it would protect the pillow from the dirt and natural hair oils. And could be modesty as well, and also because it was fashionable back then. So this is going to be kept with the Catherine Drew material, and I just think it's amazing that it's survived and it's been passed down through all those generations, and we're very lucky and very pleased to have this here now.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. And just to say, like all this material, which at the moment is in the back there in the storeroom, some of it is already going on sort of rotation on display and being displayed at our outreach exhibitions. Not yet the hat, too delicate. But ultimately, of course, the aim is that it doesn't sit hidden away in the stores, but it does go out on display. So later in the project, we're going to be looking at plans for a second phase where this material really does get out into the museum galleries, and also again gets used, continuing to be used for outreach work to really bring alive the literary heritage of the forest. Okay, so lots of talking. Let's hear another poem. It's National Poetry Day, so here we go. Maggie, this is another poem that I think it's safe to say was rediscovered. So in the 1950s, there was a piece in the local paper about some newly rediscovered Catherine Drew poems, and they were reproduced in the newspaper article. This newspaper article, this clipping, was amongst the collection. I think there were relatives sending things out to the family in America. They came to light at a place called Whitemead Park. At the time, it was the home of the Forestry Commission, what today we would call Forestry England. And that house dates back to the period that Catherine Drew was alive. And we know that someone there called Edward Machin, who was the Crown Commissioner, lived there. Machin was one of the subscribers to Catherine's book. So we wonder if the poems were there in connection with him. In the 1950s, the incumbent then of what was Machin's role, he had found the poems, and it appeared in the newspaper. So we have the newspaper article, and we've transcribed the poem. This is another of Catherine Drew's poems. Maggie, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Amidst the trees when leaves are green, by moonlight oft I've wandered, blessed with content enjoyed the scene, on nature deeply pondered. Till near the verge I softly crept, to these deep ravines saw my danger, so on again I cautious stepped, while to these gulfs no thoughtless stranger. O lovely wild romantic wood, once more I see thee gay attired, down on the slope where brambles stood, see now a mansion, 'tis our esquire's, where the trees of varied hue chequer the romantic view, where the woodlands crown the hill, as of old remaining still, where the deer for centuries gone have the thicket made their own, where the warbler's music gay charm throughout the live long day, till the twilight fades away. There, far from the public view, lived of old poor Kitty Drew. She, when o'er the woodland scene Luna reigned with look serene, where 1,000 paths meander, used deep musing oft to wander, not of learning love professed, nature her own thoughts impressed.
Thank you, Maggie. Another lovely poem about nature, isn't it? And
It
what
is.
are your thoughts on that
Well,
one?
I don't know this poem very well, Jason, but I think there's a lot more to it. And I think it needs to be looked at in depth, really, because I think there's some hidden metaphors and you know, so I think it is quite deep. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to look forward to you studying this in more depth and finding out about
I think
that.
it's also interesting how she refers to herself. Old poor Kitty Drew.
Yeah, yeah. For me, that doesn't come over as self-pity. I think it's just a description of you
how
know,
they spoke.
I'm quite poor. I'm quite old. You know?
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I would like to sort of look at it a little bit more. But I think her vocabulary is lovely, and like we say, with very little education, where's it come from?
Yeah, absolutely. What I notice in there is that again that reference to change, isn't there? And that mentioning, oh well, that used to be a kind of bramble patch. Now it's our squire's house.
Yes, there's a little bit of a deeper sort of There's a bit of sarcasm or there, isn't there?
I think so. Yeah. I think she's.
I like that. Yeah.
I think I wouldn't describe her as a kind of Marxist revolutionary, but she's certainly well aware
a little bit left of the. Yeah.
She's well aware of the tensions and the different status of people and the different wealth of people, isn't she? She comments on it quite lightly, but it's definitely there. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Maggie. So I guess important to mention also that we don't know whether these were the final versions of her poems. So they may have been kind of reasonably well-developed drafts. So it may be where there's perhaps a line or two which feels a little bit clunky, we need to maybe cut her some slack. This may have been an early draft. There may have been later versions which were more
read.
Right, yeah.
Actually, yeah. It was, yeah.
So they may have been further developed, and who knows? One day we may track down the final versions. Okay, so Catherine Drew then. So if you've got any questions, our online audience, our audience here, please sort of store them in your head for now. We will take them later. Do comment on YouTube, and Abby over there will relay the questions in a bit. And sorry, Abby, for not giving the cue on the slides. You're doing a brilliant job from what I can tell of just guessing which slide comes next. So thank you for that. So just to wrap up briefly on Catherine Drew, is there more to discover? Definitely. There's a lot of work to do, probably in the Gloucester Records Office with the short-lived newspapers, the local newspapers. We know of the Dean Forest Mercury, which in various incarnations is still going today, but we know there were some other newspapers that ran for just a few years much earlier on. So some research there, myself and Roger and maybe some of our volunteers to track down some of those other poems in print. So that's Catherine Drew, a great early poet in the Forest of Dean and a Cinderford poet. So yes, and going forward, more displays, more outreach work around Catherine's work, because we think she's a great poet, and I know Stan in our audience will agree with us. So what we're going to do now, we're going to very soon move on to Harry Beddington, but what Nicola is very kindly going to do is Nicola is going to put the Catherine Drew material back in the store. She's going to bring our artefacts out relating to our second poet we're going to be talking about today for UK National Poetry Day, and that is Harry Beddington. I've got a confession to make. Harry Beddington's one of my favourites, I've got to say. I do like Catherine Drew as well, but Harry Beddington is a particular favourite. So, Harry Beddington. Let's fast forward from Catherine Drew's death in 1867. Let's fast forward to the beginning of the 20th century. Harry was born in 1901 in an area of Cinderford known as Rusbridge. And Harry was one of twins. He had a twin sister, and they were the final children to be born of 14. So larger families back in the early 20th century. So there were 14 of them. I believe Harry was the very last to be born, the second of the twins to be born, obviously in quick succession. Harry's father was a collier, and his mum, they were both from the Forest of Dean, from the Cinderford area. Harry went to the local school, and he started work as in a local solicitor's, Weydon and Bradstock. This becomes relevant to his later career. So Mr. Bradstock was the clerk to the East Dean, that's the Cinderford area, East Dean School Board. And Harry used to help him with that work. And when Mr. Bradstock died in 1927, Harry took over that work. And that was his main job through pretty much most of his life, was the clerk to the East Dean School Board. And what I understand from talking to Harry's son is that possibly gave him a little bit of time. It didn't earn him a great deal of money, but it gave him a bit of time to indulge his real passion, which was writing, and as we'll discover, art as well. So, yes, Harry was born in 1901. By 1927-28, he was working as the clerk for the East Dean School Board. The family tells me that he had aspirations to become an architect, and I believe he was actually training to be an architect. No surprise, really, when you find out about his kind of artistic bent, if you like. But the war broke out. His training to be an architect stopped. Harry wasn't able to sign up with the military. He was a little bit old, and he had a problem with sight in one eye. He did work in civil defence and had quite a significant role in the civil defence for the Cinderford area. But this was the time, during the Second World War, that he started writing his dramas. And we have come to find out more about that in recent years, and how prolific he was as a drama writer for the local, I'd say, amateur drama scene, but it really was quite well developed in the area. So he became a significant figure in that as both a writer, an actor and producer. Most of what we know about Harry comes from his kind of later life, from the 1960s onwards. That was when he started self-publishing a couple of books in early, I think in 1961, that proved very, very popular. What was so interesting about these books is they were books of poetry and, as he described it, a forester's thoughts on things in general. So he would comment on life in general in the forest, on the forest character, but also on issues of the day. But what's so fascinating, he wrote in forest dialect. And majority of his poems are also in forest dialect. They are fantastic, I think. Absolute master of dialect. He also performed in it, but he was able to write it down. It can be a bit of a struggle for a modern readership to understand the dialect, but once you get to grips, he very helpfully puts a glossary in the back of his book, but once you get to grips of it, it's really fascinating, really entertaining. You can really hear that forest dialect voice when you're reading it. So we got to know Harry through his books in the 1960s. By 1977, he'd drawn some of the best content of those two books and was published a book called Forest Humour, which is the best of those two books. Harry was a well-liked and very popular local performer of his work as well. And in the early 1980s, with some other local writers, they began to record their performance of their work. So we've got a lovely treasure trove of Harry and other writers of the period on a vinyl album and also on a tape. So that's where we really know Harry's work from, mostly in dialect, mostly from the 60s onwards. In terms of the writers who knew Harry, who's still alive today, one of them is the fantastic poet, and I think he'd be okay with me saying he was partly inspired by Harry Bedington himself, and that's someone called Keith Morgan. Keith still works in his barber shop today in Colford, not too far from Cinderford. I went and spoke to Keith, and he gave me just a few of his memories of Harry. Abby, if you could play the audio for us.
What I remember about Harry, I didn't know him until quite late in his life, and when he more or less finished writing all his major stuff, and so at the same time I published my own poems, and he read them, gave me a lot of encouragement, wrote writing to me, and we did do concerts together, and we did recordings together. We made a long player with Winifred Foley and Dick Bryce, all of which gone now except me. But yes, I remember Harry. He's a lovely man, lovely character, and a very clever man. But he did love the Forest of Dean, the Forest people, and the dialect.
Thanks, Keith, for that. And yes, definitely, you get a real sense, and as we'll hear from the poems in a minute, you get a real sense of Harry's love for the forest. And referencing back to our earlier poet, Catherine Drew, like Catherine, Harry lived almost his whole life in Cinderford, and was a really crucial part of the kind of cultural life of Cinderford. So, National Poetry Day, we're going to hear some poems in a minute, don't worry. But let's think about Cinderford. Let's think about the changes in Cinderford that Harry would have seen. Catherine died in 1867. Harry was born in 1901 and became very popular with his writing in the 60s, 70s and the early part of the 1980s. How had Cinderford already changed and further changed during Harry's lifetime, Nicola?
Well, Harry would have witnessed, obviously, the First World War, the strikes in the 1920s. There was the 1921 lockout and the miners' strike of 1926. He would have witnessed the depression of the 30s, and then the Second World War, and there was high unemployment in Cinderford after the war. There was a decline of the mines, so coal was being worked out and it was becoming uneconomical to keep pumping the water out. So through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, one by one, the deep shaft mines closed, the last one being Northern United to close in 1965. So during this time, 50s, 60s onwards, there was a growth in factory work. So there's the establishment in Cinderford of the Valley Road Industrial Estate. You've got Cadent Foundry, you've got Lister's, you've got Meredith and Drew, the biscuit factory. There were sawmills, brickworks, steel engineering works. There was Engelhard's, there was a brush factory. So there were new industries growing up in and around Cinderford as well. There was Rosedale's, the toy factory as well. Generally, as time went on through the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a better standard of living for the people living here. The railway station was demolished in 1968, and after that it was mainly buses in and out of the forest. Also in the 60s you had the older buildings demolished in the town centre, including the town hall, to widen the roads and make a bigger space in the town centre, the area we know as the Triangle today. So there were new rows of shops put in, Woolworths became established in Cinderford. There was 70s, 80s onwards, a bit of a decline in Cinderford town centre, but still a thriving town really during Harry's time.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, so again, like Catherine, Harry saw a lot of change, in the town, and I guess that might be perhaps a clue to why, he's a little bit nostalgic. Harry could talk in dialect. He could also be very well spoken. For his performances, he assumed a kind of character, and I think we've got.
What I remember about Harry, I didn't know him.
Oh, sorry, Abby, my fault. Yeah, so I think we should have an image of Harry on one of the slides. Yeah, if we could see that one now for our. So that's Harry in the 1930s. Is there a previous one of him? No, my fault. I didn't include that. Well, anyway, so we know Harry from images from the 1960s, 70s and 80s as an older gentleman, and he would assume this kind of country character with the waistcoat and the pipe, and he'd take his glasses off and he would look like a I guess the English phrase would be a yokel. And that was his performance character, and he would perform in dialect to he was hugely popular with this performance that he did all over the forest. But of course, once upon a time, he was a young man, and hopefully we're seeing the picture there of Harry, which until we saw this photograph, we were not familiar with. This is Harry as a young man. We guess this is about 1930. This is his son, picture with his son Roy, who was born in 1930. So there's Harry as a very dapper young man. And what's exciting, some of the material we now have of Harry, and it's poems that have not been seen before, date from this period. So, how did we come across these poems? They've not been published before. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we have developed a relationship with the Harry Beddington estate, particularly Katie, Catherine Beddington Brown, who very soon on after we contacted her, suggested that this wonderful treasure trove of material relating to Harry was looking for a home, and so now we have it here in the Dean Heritage Centre. And the poems we're going to hear read in a moment by Maggie are in this folder, which we recently got our hands on and started exploring. Now, the poems are mainly typed. There are some handwritten poems in there. Some of them are familiar to us from Harry's published work. There are also some poems in there we've not seen before. And particularly interesting, there's only one which is dated. And what's exciting for us is we know it dates to 1928. So we know that Harry, who was publishing his poems in the 60s, was already in 1928, as a 27-year-old, was writing poetry. What's interesting is they are not in dialect, and they're a very different sort of style of poetry. So, Maggie, thanks, Nicola. Could we have the poem called... no, sorry, Maggie, I forgot. It's Keith. It's Keith.
Yeah. You did surprise me.
Sorry, I did launch that one. Yeah, I forgot. I've recorded Keith reading them. So over to you, Abby. We're going to hear Keith reading A Country Road.
A country road. Grey in the moonlight, white in the sunshine, winding and turning up hill and down dale, bounded by hedgerows all fragrant with blossom, or green fields far stretching where cloud shadows trail. Leading me out from the noise of the city, out from the road and tumult of men, to the peace of the hillside, the pools and the woodland, the deep peace that broods in field and in glen. Still leading onward, sunlit and silent, with a mysterious beckon that charms as it thrills, till, thinned to a thread by the pale mist of distance, it loses itself 'tween blue low-lying hills. Oh, would that this road could go onward forever, still climbing up or still winding down. But I know at the finish it only will lead me over those hilltops back to the town.
So thanks to Keith Morgan there, our local poet, for reading that. And not Maggie, sorry about that, dropping that on you. What are your thoughts as a writer and a very successful poet? What are your thoughts on that poem there?
I'm always in awe of people that can rhyme well. And I think that does exactly that, because when I try and rhyme, it's always a little bit twee. But isn't it reminiscent of the one I read about Catherine with the town, going back to the town? You know, he's a real forester, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know, he wants to be in the country and keep away from the town, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. My thoughts exactly that there's so much commonality there, a very different kind of style, but that commonality there of that. And I guess that is part of life in the Forest of Dean even today, is that we have our towns and our villages. We're surrounded by woodland, and the towns, particularly today, are quite compact and quite well developed, and not quite urban, but they are, they're quite densely populated. So I think there is a sense of that very close proximity of town and countryside, isn't there? And that wish to be out in amongst nature. Yeah, absolutely. So Harry and his wife Mildred and family, very soon after they were married, moved to the top of Cinderford, the top of Bellevue Road that travels out of the town centre up onto an area called the Barn, which has got incredible views out over the Severn. But Harry's house, apparently at the back, had a lovely big window that looked out over the forest. In fact, on a clear day, you could see some of the peaks of the Brecon Beacons. But yes, connected to the town, just on the edge of it, but connected to the forest as well. And it was very easy for Harry and his family to walk a little bit along the Barn, connect to Abbotswood, and then they were into woodland. And I understand that they would regularly go for walks, and Katie remembers going on long walks with her grandfather, with Harry, and go for quite a distance. And that was quite a common thing on a Sunday, in particular for people of Cinderford. Hopefully still is today for some people living in Cinderford, is to go out for a nice long walk, and quite a distance. So certainly places nearby like the Speech House, and somewhere very near here, Soodley Ponds. So it would be not unusual to be walking 3, 4, 5 miles on a Sunday afternoon enjoying the forest, and that's something that Harry did. So he was connected to the woods, and he absolutely loved the countryside. He was fascinated by the character of the forest people as well, but the countryside definitely. We're going to go straight into another poem for UK National Poetry Day, and this one is really even more so about the landscape, and again that theme of the wishing to be out in the countryside. So Abby, if you could play us, this is our friend Keith Morgan reading a poem by Harry Beddington called Forest Wind.
Forest Wind. As I scratch away at my daily toil, grinding away in a race with time, I raise my head for a moment or two and see the sky through the window's grime. A square of sky that laughs and thrills with glorious living shade of blue. And I heave a sigh as I drop my eye, and I know once more there is work to do. But the figures are blurs and will not keep still, and my thoughts fly away, though I grasp my pen, to where the wind and sun hold sway, and the air is free from the toil of men. Out mist the trees where the brambles twine, where the streams are gurgling and purling along, and the birds and the wind with the waters combine in glorious rhythm in nature's own song. I know that the ripples are dancing and flashing in the reeds round the banks of Sutton pools, and the sunlight is leaping, gleaming and flashing, living gems in the waters cool. The wind is driving the white clouds along, and the water looks cold as their shadows pass. The birch trees, the fir trees, the oaks and the beeches are humming their parts with the rustling grass. The tall old oaks round the old Speech House are bathed in sunlight all day through. Their branches are swaying with leaves all a whisper as they toss in the wind against the sky's deep blue. The pools are a quiver, joyous, exulting. The grasses are swishing and rustling in glee, and the whole of the forest thrills to the wind's sweet embraces as it streams o'er the valleys and sweeps through the trees. The whole world of nature is joyfully singing neath the sun-washed clouds as they scurry along, each voice waked to life by the clean sweet breezes, singing earth's oldest and loveliest song. It's only mankind is too busy to listen. Our eyes are blind to the beauties we view. We're out of tune with nature's sweet music, we poor silly men with our work to do.
Well, we're going to talk about that in just 1 second. Just a quick reminder, this is Backstage at the Gage, a Forest of Dean Writers Collection special Backstage in the Gage, coming to you, watching online, live from the Dean Heritage Centre in the heart of the Forest of Dean. We've got one more poem to come, some questions. We're going to look at some artwork. So if you're watching online, please do share the link with friends and family. It's not too late to log on. And please do put your questions in the comments section. We'll come to those at the end. That poem, Maggie, I thought it was lovely, but what were your thoughts on it?
I think it could be a message for today, even. You know, it's quite contemporary where he's sort of saying, well, we're not haven't spent in the time, you know, and exactly that really, even now. I like the way that he's placed it. He's talked about Speech House, he's talked about Sutton Pools. It's quite nice, isn't it, that it is of the forest then, it can't be anywhere else. I like that.
Yeah, it's very place specific, and they're both, he and Catherine Drew are very place specific, aren't they?
But he's not overdone it.
No.
You know,
no. Like so many of our forest writers, they are wonderfully place-rooted, but that's not to say they're only of interest to people who are interested in the Forest of Dean. My thoughts exactly, that very kind of contemporary sense of we're not engaging with nature and we're ignoring it, and we're foolish to do that. A kind of biographical note, again, that links to his view out of the window from his house. And his job as a clerk, he would have been based in the town, possibly in the town hall and later in the town council offices, depending on where he was sat. If he was upstairs, he would have that view of the Forest of Dean. So he may well have literally been sat there working, you know, and looking out at the forest and yearning to be out in
mulling over his words, To me as well, he comes across as a very contented man.
Yes.
Because how can you write that if you're not in tune with everything around you?
That's a really great observation. And from what I know from talking to his granddaughter Katie and also to his son John, is that's definitely a sense, that's just an impression I get. Katie talked about what a wonderful grandfather he was. And I think I do get that sense of that contentment, that he's kind of happy with his life in the town and his engagement with the town and engagement with the forest and the people. So I think that works really well. He mentioned Sutton Pools. Now, Sutton Pools is not a name we hear very often today. We would know it as Soodley Ponds, wouldn't we, Nicola? And very, very close to the Dean Heritage Centre. Tell us a little bit, very briefly, because I'm just looking at our technical crew and just hoping that the live stream will last past 1 o'clock. Maybe they'll be able to tell us. But just tell us a little bit about Sutton Pools, or what we know of today as Soodley Ponds.
I'll be brief then.
And I tell you what, I'll hold up this amazing picture whilst you describe it. I'll hold up this amazing picture that has been donated to the collection of Harry's painting or picture of Soodley Ponds or Sutton Pools.
Yeah, just a little bit of history and context. It's known as Soodley Ponds today, but also Sutton Pools. People at one time did think that the ponds had been put in for industrial use in the Soodley Valley, but actually we think it was William Crawshay or his son Henry in the mid to late 1800s who put the ponds in as fish ponds. We've also got in our archive wonderful photographs from the 1930s of people using the ponds to swim in and dive. So we've got a little bit of history on the ponds, and they're only just across the road there. And today it's still a very popular site for visitors to walk around and locals as well. It's a beautiful little area.
And this picture here, I should mention, was very kindly donated by the son of another Forest of Dean writer, a contemporary of Harry's, Humphrey Phelps. This was donated by his son Simon, so this was in the possession of the Phelps family. I'm very grateful for it to be donated. Harry did several of these coloured drawings, I guess, or pictures of all sorts of different places, lots in the forest. He also did lots of really wonderful charcoal sketches. So very, very talented man. I'm looking to our technical crew. I wonder if anyone can tell me, is our live stream going to end at 1 o'clock or will it keep going? Okay, we think it's okay. So our online audience, my apologies if we suddenly cut out at 1 o'clock. That's purely my fault for not managing the time better. Okay, let's go on to our next poem. And again, this is Keith reading it. This is a lovely short poem called Down the Sunlit Roadway.
Forest Wind. Down the sunlit roadway. Down the sunlit roadway I strolled with you, where the honeysuckle leaned to kiss you too. Larks on high were singing their fascinating tune on that peerless day in that warm and wonderful June. Never such a moment till the end of time when you told me, dear, you'd be mine. As we go through life together, memories they take me ever down a sunlit roadway, down a sunlit road with you.
Lovely. A much shorter poem, very personal. What are your
I
thoughts?
got tears in my eyes. Sorry, it's quite emotional.
Yeah, it's a lovely poem, isn't it?
It reminds me of my mum and dad, you see, so yeah.
And I think what that speaks to is the lovely relationship between Harry and his wife. They met when they were very, very young at a dance at the Miners' Welfare Hall in Cinderford, and I was very lucky enough to be shown a photograph of them, I think around the time of their wedding, by their son John. It was just a beautiful, beautiful photograph. There's Harry, as we know now, was a very dapper young man, and I can only describe Mildred at that time as a flapper. She looked absolutely incredible. And the pair of them just look amazing. Of course, we're more familiar with Harry and Mildred in much later life, but to see them as those young people it was a real privilege to see that photograph.
It is. Very personal this is, too. It's lovely.
Yeah, a very, very sweet poem. I understand they had a wonderful relationship right to the end of, well, Mildred's life passed away, sadly, before Harry. Mildred was very important in Harry's life. We understand that it was Mildred's interest in wanting to perform in amateur drama that prompted Harry to start writing plays. And boy, did he do a good job. In fact, one of them, we know, won a local award at the Cheltenham Festival of Drama and Music. It won the first prize, and it was all written in dialect, so quite incredible. A lot of his plays were written in dialect. Okay, so I guess that's the end of our poems now for UK National Poetry Day, our poems from the Forest of Dean Writers Collection. The collection, just to point out, is far more than just Harry and Catherine. We've got some amazing writers in there. That's for another day. So what have we got planned? Again, with Harry's work, it's great. There are drama scripts. We've rediscovered lots of dramas we didn't know about that have been forgotten. So we're hoping at some point to get those performed, which I think would be so exciting. And again, to get his poetry out there and perhaps some publications, the same as Catherine, her unpublished work, Harry's unpublished work. So I guess that's it really, and time for questions. Any questions, Abby, from our online audience?
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you. We've had a couple messages and a couple comments come in. Lots of people, not just local foresters, which is really interesting. So one of the first questions I've got here is, what were Harry Bedington's plays actually about?
Crikey, there's a question. Okay, well, whoever asked that question, thank you for the question. What were his plays about? Well, several of them were written in dialect. They were broadly, I guess you would say, comedies, but they really do vary. A lot of them are very character-based. So his prize-winning play, Foot in the Bill, is described in the title, A Farce in One Act, is really about four kind of neighbours, and in essence, it is a farce. There's a lot of great physical comedy in there, and it's based around someone trying to make a false compensation claim for an accident. Good knockabout fun. But he then wrote a play called Limbo, which is a kind of, I guess, a comedy drama, which the first part is set in the 1850s and relates to a kind of British colonialism then, and fast forwards to the then present day of the 1950s, and it is, without sounding too highfalutin, is basically a commentary on the legacy of empire. It's a ghost story. So that's that one. There's another lovely one called Homespun, which is about the Home Guard in the Forest of Dean during the Second World War and a kind of spy intrigue. Another wonderful play. I've got to be honest, the others that have just come into the collection, we haven't had a chance yet even to read them. They only arrived a week or so ago. So they're about lots of different things. At the heart of it, it's about characters and about comedy.
We've also got another question here. Why do you think neither poets are known that well outside of the forest?
Oh, that's a great question. That's really stumped me. I think partly because they were focused on their local audience. Catherine Drew was what these days we might in academia describe as a labouring class female poet, of which there were some that became reasonably well known. There's a notion of the Forest of Dean being sort of cut off and isolated. To what extent that's true, I'm not sure. You know, we got the Severn and the Wye in past times, which were like kind of motorways in a sense for traffic and trade. Then we had the railways. I guess because they're very, very, although they've got appeal to a wider audience, they were focused on a local audience. We are trying to change that. We are, you know, saying they're a wonderful writer's a place, but they've got more to say to people outside the forest. So we are doing our best to get them out there into the world with events like today.
Just thought I'd let you know as well, we've got Rob Beddington in the live stream, and he's just left a really nice comment saying, I remember well the forest walks and picnics with Grandad Harry and Grandma Mildred, Katie and the family. His poetry has brought it all back, as did the memory of the view of the Brecon Beacons. Thank you, which I just thought was a nice comment.
Oh, great. Well, it's lovely to know that family of Harry are watching online. Thanks for that, Rob. Any other questions?
Yeah, so we've got, where can I get a copy of Catherine's published poems?
Right, well, as indicated, they are, even the modern, the 2002 is quite rare. There is a copy in Cinderford Library, depending on where you are. You can look online, they do crop up occasionally. We are working on this. Myself and my colleague Roger Deeks with the team at the museum are working on a new edition of her collected works. Is something our friend here, Stan, has been pushing us to do and is encouraging us to get on with it. We are looking at publishing a new collection of her work, which includes the 1841 collection and all the newly rediscovered poems that we found. So we are working on that, and we're going to write a nice long introduction covering some of the things we've been talking about today about that context. Is that it for our...
We've got another question that's just come in. So this is more about poetry in the forest in general. So we have Matt that has asked, this may be off topic, but how much of a presence of fairy poetry is there in the forest? You know, considering it's quite like a scenic area. And are there any from the two poets included today?
Fairies, there's a lot. I will refer you to a writer called Joyce Latham, who's also a poet. Without sounding too abrupt, she was writing about her childhood, and she said there were no fairies at the bottom of our garden. There was an outhouse and a bucket. So I don't want to speak for everyone in the Forest of Dean. I'll refer you to my friends and colleagues here in a moment. But I don't know of many fairy poems specifically. There are, in fact, some of Joyce Latham's own poems talk about the kind of magic of the forest and the sense of magic of the landscape. So there is some of that. But I think a lot of the poets were keen to point out this is a place of, you know, sometimes of hardship as well as beauty. It's a place where some of the natural beauty is not at all natural. It's the remains of old quarries or a tumbled down industrial building, and the forest itself is managed, has been in the past and is today. So, yeah, I can't think of any that talk about fairies as such, but over to you, Maggie.
Well, I don't know much about any myths in the forest about fairies. No. I wonder why Matt is asking specifically about fairies.
Well, he was saying that a lot of the poems read today remind him of J.R.R. Tolkien and a similar sort of style.
Yeah.
But he actually said it was more incredible than Tolkien. So I think that's also
a
fantastic compliment.
There's a compliment.
Well, tell him I'll write one.
Nicola, any thoughts on that? Your knowledge of all the amazing material in the collection, not just poetry, everything, and your understanding of forest history. Have you come across any of the notion of a kind of fairy realm talked about?
No, I haven't. No, not at all, no.
Okay. No. Matt, that's not to say it's out there and we haven't discovered it. And obviously we've got poets like Maggie and lots of other contemporary writers who are very active today. There may be some people writing that sort of poetry. I'm not. Well, we're not aware of it. That's not to say it's not out there. Matt, you might like to write some yourself. Is that all the questions?
Yeah, that is all the questions that we got in.
Okay, so Any questions from our live audience here with us in the Gage Library at the Dean Heritage Centre?
I was just wondering whether Beddington had any relationship with Dennis Potter, because they would have been around the same time.
Thank you for that. That's a really good question. I don't know whether they knew each other. Possible. Not that I know of. I do know that Harry Beddington wrote a wonderful piece. He was a regular correspondent to the local Dean Forest Mercury, which had its printing offices in Cinderford. And he had a lovely piece when A Beast with Two Backs was broadcast, which was a controversial play by Dennis Potter. The controversial and Dennis Potter often go together. If you don't know, Dennis Potter was a very significant playwright and dramatist in British television in the 60s, 70s and 80s, a native of the Forest of Dean. He did a play in 1968 called A Beast with Two Backs, drawing on a notorious local incident from 1889, which involved the beating up of some Frenchmen and the killing of their dancing bears. A little bit dark for National Poetry Day. It was a dark element of forest kind of history, and controversial and problematic. Potter drew on it for this play. It was a big local reaction, most of it against it. Harry wrote a wonderful piece about him walking down into town, and a couple of local ladies going, "Oh, here, Harry, what's reckoned of the play that was on the telly?" And he talks about the conversation he had with the ladies, and he reflects on it himself. There's that connection with Potter, but whether he knew him or not, I don't know. He would obviously be aware of him. Whether Potter knew of Harry, I think he might have known of his work. Harry wrote a poem about the bears as well, a comic poem. I think Potter would have known of the poem, definitely. Whether they ever met, I don't know. Other questions from our audience? No? Okay. There's one last slide, which is a kind of indication of all the people who've made today possible. I would like to thank our 3 brilliant students from the University of Gloucestershire who are running all the cameras and everything today. Thank you to Ivor in the van parked outside the museum, Ivor of BBA.media, who's made all this possible by providing the equipment and running all the technology. Thank you to Nicola and everyone else at the Dean Heritage Centre. Thank you to Abby. The Forest of Dean Writers Collection is led by the University of Gloucestershire, but is absolutely a partnership and couldn't be done, obviously, without the Dean Heritage Centre. So very, very proud of that partnership. Thank you to also National Lottery players through the Heritage Lottery Fund. You've made all this possible. You're making all this happen. So thank you to National Lottery players. Thank you to everyone at the Heritage Fund. So I guess that's a sign off from us, from Maggie, from Nicola, from Abby and the crew here and our live audience. Thank you for watching online. If you want to find out more about these 2 writers, Catherine Drew and Harry Beddington, and all the other amazing Forest of Dean writers through history, just go to readingtheforest.co.uk and knock yourself out. There's loads of brilliant information on there and fascinating details and some of the work of these poets. So thanks again. Thank you, everyone. That's it. Farewell from the Dean Heritage Centre.
Thank you for joining the live stream. It will begin shortly.